Good morning, everyone, to our session on mobility and particularly sustainability. Where are we? Of course, we did a prep session for this, and it went well. So if it's not going well now, we know normally it's nice. So just to give you a little bit of comfort here. But before we start, we should introduce ourselves. My name is Patrick Ayert. I am a lawyer at Hogan Lovells and also responsible for our global sector program. Personally, I deal a lot with automotive and mobility. I have clients in the industry there. And maybe Sharon, my colleague, would be next to introduce.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning. I'm Sharon Lewis. I live in Paris. I'm a capital markets partner at Hogan Lovells, and I head our financial institutions, insurance and investment sectors. I also do a lot of work in the automotive industry, financing the captives, but actually also increasingly some of the smaller players. So thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
It should be on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Siobhan Dalton, and I'm an American lawyer, but living in Paris for 25 years and working in Stellantis, where I have done lots of different roles, from capital markets to venture to Africa and free to move. But now I'm really focused on circular economy and all the legal issues around circular economy. In the branch that we call Sustainera. That's our brand for circularity.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Sauber. I'm a director at Arcadis. We are a global design engineering firm focusing on natural and built assets, headquartered in the Netherlands. And my remit really encompasses everything from automotive clients, but also mobility, sustainability, and of course, all things circular economy. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So let me start with Siobhan from the industry. Stellantis is a very major player. Stellantis has also, as many others, ambitious goals when it comes to sustainability and decarbonizing the automotive world, basically. So can you tell us the latest news? What is your focus area? You just mentioned something. What was the name? Circular?
Sustainera.
Sustainera. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and where your focus is in terms of, making the automotive world more sustainable?
Sure. Sustainera is the mark that we've given to our remanufactured, reused, recycled products. It's our business unit for the circular economy. I was speaking yesterday on a panel with Renault, and they have their subsidiary called The Future is Neutral. So we're not a subsidiary, we're a business unit and a brand, but it's the similar effort. When Carlos Tavares announces our decarbonization goals, this is one of many pillars. So this is not the only thing, obviously. I think we've announced over and over again that we're trying to cut our carbon footprint in half by 2030 and go neutral by 2038. And the pillars contributing to that go from supply chain to electric vehicles to how we deal with batteries to eco design. There's circular economy. There are the raw materials. There are just a ton of different components, obviously. And we're just one of them. But the promise of circular economy is to be a part of that strategy, and also to be profitable and to be a building block that contributes, and I don't know the exact percentage contribution of our circular economy among all the other things, to decarbonization, but it's not insignificant, and it also is becoming something that makes money. And so that's really the spot that we wanted to be in, to be something that takes us toward two goals, profitability and sustainability. And so that's...
And maybe one follow-up question, because you mentioned 2030, 2038, I think you said. Given the disruptions that we are seeing in the industry, also with respect to EVs, the shortage in the supply chain, battery technology, but also consumer acceptance and the like, is this still the direction, or do you think that there might be also a little bit of a delay in achieving these goals?
No, I mean, well, there's not going to be any delay in our, we're not going to delay our ambitions. I mean, I guess you could always say you might not make them, but there's no, if one of the levers slows down, then another will have to speed up. No, I don't see the difficulties, the ups and downs of the EV promise affecting our overall goals.
Okay.
But that's the thing about being a large OEM is you have things to balance off. So if EVs don't take off as fast as you want, you can do something else. So you're not totally committed to one bucket and one solution.
Okay, thanks, Shaban. Sharon, you've been dealing with these issues for quite some time, particularly also sustainability, ESG. You look at it from a finance perspective. Can you tell us how finance changed, particularly in the last few years, when it comes to sustainable efforts of companies?
Yes, with pleasure. I mean, I think there are multi-strands to this. I think the first actually, fixing it in the automotive industry, not so many years ago, what were vehicles? It was metal on wheels, essentially. And what you were doing was actually financing largely the purchase and the ownership of metal on wheels. That has dramatically changed, and particularly, we've moved much more to leasing models or non-ownership models, and increasingly, I think consumers don't really want to purchase for their own footprint, but actually, while waiting for these changes in vehicles, not wanting to be committed to a vehicle over a very long period of time. Difficulties also in financing some of the vehicles. Some of the electric vehicles in particular are more expensive. So there's all that sort of thing, which is sort of like permuting the landscape. But at the same time, the automotives, like other sectors, are doing more and more to actually avail themselves of green financing with the issue of green bonds and or sustainable bonds, using the proceeds of those transactions to actually feed in and use the proceeds to invest, for example, in electric vehicles and the like. The same also very much in the syndicated loan market, again, using levers to try and push the sustainability agenda. And you're seeing that really sort of like trying to connect efforts in sustainability or green with actually improved margins. So we're seeing a lot of green or sustainable linked loans, I think, which is a really, really good thing. And actually, it's now starting to move into the securitization market. Again, those same type of levers being used to encourage the development of more sustainable vehicles. And I think that is really interesting. And at the same time, there's a different overlayer. And I'll give an example, which is not cars, but turkeys. So there's an increased use of digitalization in finance. Digitalization to track improvements in supply chain, distribution, the circularity of the economy. And my imagination was lifted at the story of turkeys. So a turkey manufacturer, encouraged by its bank to improve the supply chain of its turkeys right from birth. So birth of the turkeys, bringing up of the turkeys, unfortunately killing of the turkeys, transport of the turkeys to the supermarkets and or small shops, tracked using blockchain technology So you can see the improvements that are being made. And ultimately, actually, what happens, the turkeys have a better life even if they die. The consumer is happy because they get better quality turkey. And actually, then the company itself is happy because it gets better financing, and the bank is happy because it has better credit.
Just to be clear, so the car is the turkey?
Yeah.
Okay, because we usually don't refer to our cars as turkeys, or that would be a bad thing. But okay. So our car is the turkey. So, I mean, what you're saying, to be selfish and take it back to the circular concept, though, is that's exactly what we want to do. We want to take the turkey car from its birth all the way, to its putting it on the market. That's the notion of circular, right? You're not just putting it on the market and then it goes into a scrapyard. So you're putting it on the market, you're taking it back from the market, you're taking the good parts that you can and reusing them and selling them, parts that are pretty good that you can fix, you're repairing them, then you're remanufacturing them if you can, and then the last thing is recycling. But then if you do recycle, then you take the materials and you stick them back into the turkey chain. Now I'm not going to be able to get turkeys out of my head for the rest of my career.
And neither will you.
Right.
Thank you.
Now, also a brief follow-up question for you. As the focus is very much on BEVs now in particular, and the battery is a very significant part of the vehicle also in the future, does this change also the finance world in terms of, how finance is structured, and also in terms of the players that come in, startups in particular? Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yes. Again, it goes from this idea that one was financing metal on wheels to now much more, including a battery, which doesn't necessarily have the same lifespan as the vehicle. And so, how do you finance the vehicle? What is the length of the financing? Is it correlated with the battery, or is it correlated with the vehicle? Is it more expensive? Is it not more expensive? How do you take security over the vehicle? How do you take security over the battery? And there is no one formula to that, but it's creating a lot of different ways in which one is financing transactions. And the startup piece is actually very important when thinking about that, because you actually are also thinking increasingly, if you're a banker, about the credit risk on the startup. And so that tends to mean that the financing is, more expensive. Some of it actually doesn't necessarily work. Some of these startups haven't worked, but I'm absolutely convinced that there is such a momentum in the industry that we will iron out those wrinkles.
Which brings us also to Natalie. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing at Arcadis. And I know you are advising large companies, but also smaller ones. And so how do you see that changing, also building upon what Sharon just said?
So I suppose from a mobility / electric vehicle / charging infrastructure and circular economy, as Siobhan already rightfully mentioned, look, we are now demanding more and more that we are switching from petrol to diesel, or switching from petrol and diesel to electric vehicles. The supply chain that comes with that, and the sort of like added issues in terms of what do we do with these EVs once they hit their lifespan, what do we do with the batteries once they hit their end of life, that all needs to be sorted out. We're going to have way more demand for not only EVs but also batteries. So we need to sort of like on the one hand think about how do we manage that in the back end, but also how do we bring that back to the consumers. I was on a talk the other day with Peter Campbell, who's a journalist for the FT at Automotive, and he was sort of like telling me that, look, we've almost sort of like reached that peak of where EVs are now becoming almost financially viable. There's obviously a lot of push in terms of the government, in terms of, as we've already mentioned, getting these types of initiatives or these financing in place. But also now consumers are more and more ready. There's still a lot of hiccups in terms of charging infrastructure. It's not quite there yet. And from an Arcadis perspective, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Building out the infrastructure, making consumers more aware, but also working with governments and legislations to sort of like have that honed in on a country by country basis. from a sustainability side of things, we are obviously also working with OEMs or battery manufacturers, especially around the gigafactory place. So obviously there's already lots of noise, whether that's Tesla, whether that's Northvolt, whether that's ACC, and whether that's Chinese now looking also to expand their reach into Europe or even into the US. How do we sort of like make these sites viable for them? How do we make sure that, again, the supply chain is ethical? On the one hand, it's also sort of like maintained in a way that we're not harming the environment more than we're sort of like currently looking out to do. So there's a whole play of things involved in putting an EV onto the road and making sure that it is sustainable, it is economically, but it also makes sense from a financial aspect. And we're not going to regret our life choices in, I don't know, 10 or 20 years. Because as Siobhan already mentioned, yes, EV is one way, but there's also other avenues to look for. And you know, whether that's hydrogen, obviously in certain use cases, not for everything. But there are different ways for us to sort of like play a part. And we need to make sure that the right use case is there. And that's going to be promoted going forward.
And just as we are talking a lot about cars, actually, what about micromobility or mobility a little bit more holistically? Yesterday, when we were at dinner and we had a discussion at the table about that mobility has even become a little bit of a negative word in terms of, you know, what is it and where is it going? How do you see that? And are we not missing out to see that a little bit more holistically? I mean, talking about micromobility, it's not much here, but it was full of micromobility players a couple of years ago. Where are they? Are they still part of the mobility world? How do you see that? Because the whole idea of sustainability, or basically mobility, new mobility, was based upon sustainability considerations, startups, founding companies just because of that purpose, and now, you know, disappearing or being in trouble.
I mean, look, I think with everything that's new and exciting, of course, micromobility, when it first hit the market, it was really exciting in terms of the types of technologies. All of a sudden, the electric bikes were hitting up, the electric scooters were hitting up. You could see these little wheelies where you could just sort of like jump on and move around. That was all really exciting. I mean, a couple of years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, obviously the market has moved on, technology has moved on, but also the interest from the public has moved on. So while this is still, I think, still very much in place, obviously, it has become a little bit burdened by whether that's laws or regulations, because how do we basically regulate them around, for example, electric bikes in rural areas where potentially the pickup either isn't as good or people love dumping in the lakes and so. So we need to sort of like come up with some solutions, whether it's in cities such as Barcelona, or even in Paris, where you have significant accidents with electric scooters as well. So on the one hand, I think there's a piece around innovation being super exciting and everyone being sort of like in it. And then I think there's also at some point people are waking up. You're going to have to think, where does the money actually is at the moment? And also in terms of what else is coming up. So I think from a mobility, and similar to what we discussed last night at dinner, it is, I think, a word that has been used very widely and very successfully, but it's now almost sort of like, I think we're sort of like moving on in terms of what, not so much what else is there, but what do we actually have currently on the market? What is currently used by the consumers and what do we actually need? So we need to almost sort of like paddle back a bit and really take a look at it. Where do we want to see ourselves in 5, 10, 20 years? And how do we basically get there in an essence? Mobility, future mobility is one part, but it's so much more than that. So I think we need to now dive into the pockets, whether that's autonomous, whether that's electric, whether that's shared, because obviously that's still very much happening.
Well, yes.
I think that the talents, though, that are here today, and the startups that are here, are those talents and those initiatives are not going to become irrelevant just because you don't have a trottinette, which we call the scooters here, right? So if the niche of the startup was the IT behind that micromobility system and being able to put things in the right place at the right time, you know, Stellantis, the things that we're doing are going to need that. You might need it more in the last mile, right? In your logistics planning to stay sustainable. How are you going to make sure that you have the right place where trucks stop outside the city and then come into the city in smaller cars? You're going to need the blockchain applications. You're going to need the applications. Okay, so you might not be making a trottinette anymore, but you're thinking about a small one-person vehicle. And those, I mean, if you see the Ami that Stellantis has put out, it looks like people in France call it the yogurt pot. But I mean, it's some of the same creativity saying, how can we get something smaller? How can we get the storage we need down? So I don't think, that we're going to see the same kind of startups, but the same people who had those ideas are not going to change, and it's not going to become irrelevant. It's just going to become relevant and it will be relevant towards sustainability, but just maybe in a little bit different ways.
And just to add on that as well, I think we've already mentioned a technology, AI, this is now really sort of like taking over. And I think a lot of the companies and the people are focusing now more on that in terms of how do we distinguish ourselves, how do we make use of that artificial intelligence to further enhance our products, to further enhance the supply chain, and also sort of like to use all of that amazing intel that we've been gathering over the last couple of years to enhance the products and enhance the consumer experience on that.
And let me ask a follow-up, particularly, from the perspective of a major automotive company. Cars are very much still, of course, dominating your life, but to what extent do you also try to see it as a company more holistically? Not just about cars, but how we move in the future mobility. I mean, you've been involved in some shared mobility within Stellantis. Now you do circular economy. So how do you see that going forward?
I think that that's a tough question. It's a good question, but to pare it down a little bit. I mean, the ambition of Stellantis has not been for the last 5 or 6 years in terms of how many cars we sell, our market share, what metal we put on the road. It's been helping people get around, and that is very sounds very sustainable, sounds very democratic, but we want to be involved in every way that people get around. We don't want to say the startups handle that kind of thing and we sell the cars. And so, like any big company, you don't want to be left behind. You want to find out a way that you can be in everything. So I think in that sense, it will always be part of our DNA. No one's going to make it as an OEM by sticking to putting cars on the road anymore. I forget what the second part of your question was.
No, I think you answered almost most of it in terms of, where do you see the future also for Stellantis as a mobility player, right? And I think you responded to this. I think what we can see is a lot of partnerships. And I think also Stellantis is doing this in selected areas to try to partner with others. I mean, we can clearly see this with autonomous vehicles. We had many autonomous vehicles companies out there, and now and the OEMs were trying to pursue it themselves. Think of Argo AI, and now they are partnering with others. And I wanted to get to Sharon again to ask you, what does it mean from a finance perspective now? Do you see more finance in terms of partnerships, or how does this change also the way the financial institutions are looking at the future of mobility?
Well, I think that financial institutions are very cognizant of the really huge change within the OEMs, and I think are very supportive of that change and of bringing projects to the OEMs. I think the financial institutions, for their own sustainability agendas, are keen to support the startups. But, as Siobhan has said, some of that has not been perfect. You start by, for example, financing a company that produces the mobilette, and then suddenly, the mobilette is forbidden in Paris. It's a very difficult thing, and it's a very difficult credit piece to achieve that balance. But I think that they will continue, and I think that it will get better. And I think that some of the things that government, the European Commission and the like are doing will encourage that financing. I think I also ought to probably mention blended finance. I think that government is going to be confronted with improving infrastructures, creating what is necessary in order to facilitate this movement from metal on wheels to the sustainable vehicles. And I think that since government don't have all the money needed to make that change, that step change, I think that what government will do is look for blended finance products. So looking to finance partly by the state and partly by private enterprise. And I think we'll see, we've seen examples of that, but I think we'll see increasing amount of that type of financing coming through as well.
Now, let me ask you, maybe as I received the first hint that we are at the end of the time or nearing the end of the time, a final question to this group, and starting with Natalie, maybe, what is your wish in terms of the future mobility? Or your vision? I want to know, because I'm unsure about it myself.
It's a lovely open-end question that you can answer in so many ways. I think my wish would be to, first of all, I want to see that the industry never stops innovating. We've seen some companies who have been amazing at the forefront in terms of being very ambitious with their plans, with the type of products they're putting out there, and are now almost crumbling because they're seeing actually it's a lot harder getting into that market. We had it with Dyson and their supposedly electric car. Which would have been a really exciting thing. We had it with Arrival, a UK company, very much on electric vehicles and really focusing on micro factories, which was, I've been to one of the factories, it's absolutely insane to have to be able to step into a little square 2x2 and for them to be able to produce their car. But I would wish for the industry to really never stop innovating, because there's still so much more to do. And at the same time, use technology and AI. I'm a huge fan of all things AI, whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Copilot, but also whether that's anything to do where we can sort of like address some of the common concerns that we have, whether that's sustainability, circular economy, whether that's making sure the supply chain is right, but also making sure that we create a world where we can live in. And it's in a positive sort of like way. I mean, at Arcadis, we call it planet positive future. And that's sort of like what we're striving to do, to create that environment where tomorrow is sustainable for us to still live in.
Oh, that's great. And thanks for mentioning the living part, because as you know, we talk about living mobility very much. Siobhan, what is your vision or wish?
I think to see a non-zero sum game, to see that in this industry, the OEMs and the big players can profit without being at the expense of the startups, and vice versa. And the suppliers realizing that finding a way for everyone to win and for everyone to collaborate, so that the OEM takes the best of the ideas. The OEM has more resources, has more synergies, has more economies of scale, but doesn't have certain of the flexibility of the startups. But in some ways, he does have a lot more flexibility, because I said, if one thing doesn't work, okay, you go to the next thing. And I think, and it's because of finance too. If people who have money have to pick their horse, right? But if we could see more collaboration in some way, between the supply chain, between the suppliers and the purchasers, between the downstream, that's what I would like.
That's great. So we had innovation, collaboration, and now I got a warning, I think. As quick as you can be.
I'll come back to turkeys.
The turkeys, more turkeys.
No, you can just see that actually, if you focus from one end to the other end, everybody is a winner, even the turkeys.
That's a nice ending. Thank you so much. We run out of time.